Jasia, you have in front of you 3 gorgeous books. An extraordinary amount of work has gone into them, documenting the life and work of your aunt, Franciszka Themerson, and her husband, Stefan Themerson, which you summarised as 50 years of independent creative enterprise and intellectual life in a relatively cold climate. Can you tell us a little bit about what's in these colourful tomes?
Well, these 3 volumes are a catalogue of their archive. So let me just tell you, when they died, which was in 1988, all their papers came to this house. I looked at them. I didn't really understand what there was. I mean, I can't tell you how many boxes. The whole thing occupied an entire room. And time came to sort it out. Of course, I was interested. I mean, the whole job, let me tell you, took 20 years. But when you have somebody's working life in front of you, how do you divide it? It can be alphabetical, it can be chronological, it can be by theme, and it can be by idea. And so I decided that the documents of their life should be divided into 3 sections. Letters and documents, then their life, which of course was not complete, and their work with Gaberbocchus. Gaberbocchus, their publishing company, which also housed the Gaberbocchus Common Room. The first club in this country, or at least in London, for artists and scientists to meet. So letters and documents are alphabetical. And let me just show you 1 or 2 pages, because you will see that under each heading it can be a name, it can be a company. There is an explanation of what is in that folder under that name. Why did I bother with the detail? Well, it's supposed to be a catalogue, and this catalogue can be looked at in America, in Brazil, in Chile, and the person looking at it could say, I would like to see the original correspondence between, say, Franciszka or Stefan Themerson and this person. And they can read about it and decide. There are 20 letters and some documents. Is it worthwhile going to Warsaw to look at the originals? I said Warsaw because this is where the archive is now. So the letters, somewhere in Polish, somewhere in English, somewhere in French. So I left the French alone because I assumed that many people would know French, but descriptions of Polish correspondence, of course, are in English.
There's some wonderful serendipitous discoveries that come about through the alphabeticization. For example, in the C section, there's letters from Christie's auction house. There's also a letter from Italo Calvino. So there's this extraordinary breadth of intellectual and creative life, as you say in your introduction, that your aunt and uncle were part of when they came to London.
Well, Franciszka came to London in 1940. Stefan got here in 1942. Well, this isn't the absolute complete collection of their correspondence. Why? Because Franciszka threw stuff out and Stefan left it somewhere. So some things got lost, and I feel very, very guilty because I did something I should never have done. I threw out the envelopes, and of course the addresses of some of the correspondence remain a mystery. So it was one of the mistakes I made, because after all, this was the first archive of this sort that I made.
And did you start sorting through with the idea of publishing it at some point?
No, not at all. I certainly have listed everything, because if you don't know what is there, you will forget, so it's got to be written down. And I had everything that you see in these printed catalogues. I had it in 8 grey lever arch files, and this I still have.
Can you tell us about the designer, because the design of these books is absolutely beautiful?
Yes, he is a wonderful designer. His name is Pedro Cid Proença. He is Portuguese and lives in London.
It's just so enjoyable to look through, to leaf through, because although there is, yes, a lot of information, the images are beautifully judged, beautifully reproduced, yes, as well. It was printed in Amsterdam, is that right?
Yes, well,
in Holland.
In Holland. Yeah. It's printed in the Netherlands. Now, this last volume, volume 3, Gaberbocchus Press, it really has 2 sections. First of all, there's a section about all the Gaberbocchus books.
There are about 60 books, is that right?
60 books they published. And at the beginning, there is a section about the symbol of Gaberbocchus Press. I have to find it.
I love that mind map that we saw a glimpse of, just a sort of mental map of the Themersons, yes, and their connections.
Stefan was always making diagrams.
Yeah.
This is a diagram of Gaberbocchus books, sometime during the 60s. The exact date is, of course, written in the caption on the next page.
I love the idea of the seeming spontaneity with which they decided to set up their own book imprint, but that was very much about a desire to bring writers that they admired, that hadn't perhaps been translated into print, and also combine the beautiful artistry that Franciszka had demonstrated in illustrating Stefan's children's books into, yes, the picture.
Yes. Well, she, apart from being a painter, it was her primary activity. She was an illustrator, drawer, theatre designer, and she designed some of the Gaberbocchus books. But the symbol of Gaberbocchus is this, and I think it's a wonderful symbol. Here it is. Now, I just want to show you a few more pages. Here we have the pages, the actual books photographed on tissue paper. And these kind of touches to get the photographs right, etc.
It's a real labour of love, isn't it?
Well, it's not really labour. I wouldn't use that term. It's like making a work of art, or like knitting. You knit a bit, then this is the next thing to do. That's the next thing to do. And of course, you might make a design to begin with, but the rest sort of goes step by step.
But you're bearing witness to an extraordinary sort of creative endeavour in a manner that's appropriate and respectful.
Absolutely, absolutely. But what I want to show you now is something which very much influenced me, which was the Gaberbocchus common room. I was always interested in robots, in machines, and so on. And this club, which existed for 2 years, 57 to 59, was a club which was attended by artists and scientists. So, for instance, scientific films were being shown at the same time as experimental films. And there were some lectures about cybernetics, and that's the year is 1957. And it's the first time that I heard the term cybernetics mentioned. And of course, I got interested.
In terms of the extraordinary environment that your aunt and uncle were creating through their work and their interests, at what point when you became an adult, I guess, did you realise how exceptional that experience was, that those ideas that you were exposed to and encouraged in?
I knew that from very, very early childhood, because Stefan wrote books for children and Franciszka illustrated them. They were different from normal books for children. They didn't have angels, witches, Aladdins, sort of the kind of miracles you expect in children's books. The books were about ordinary world and its own miracles, the miracle of light, and the light bulb, and the train, and the wheel, and things like this. I always knew that they were very special.
When you looked at their work and the breadth of it and the extraordinary philosophers and writers that they were working with, did it surprise you that at the time, I think you've said, they weren't hugely, they weren't celebrated in the UK. There was definitely an interest in Poland, but they didn't have the success that they might have wanted with Gaberbocchus in the UK initially.
Well, it's true. That is true. England is a very special place. When you arrive here, as they did, they could do whatever they wanted to do, but it didn't mean that anybody would be interested. Elsewhere, they wouldn't have been able to do what they wanted to do. So, had they gone to America, they would have been able to do more, because Stefan wanted to make more films, needed some money, and here he couldn't get it. So, and also, there wasn't such a response to their work. Well, it's a different culture, in a way, and you can't be surprised.
There has been a very good reappraisal of their work and their role, hasn't there, with the release, for example, last year of their extraordinary film Europa. But the story of that film's rediscovery is quite amazing. Would you care to tell us about that?
Well, Europa, a 12-minute film, black and white, made from a poem by Anatole Stern of that title. They used the poem as the screenplay, and they made it in a series of collages or photomontages in motion Stefan had a special technique of using a trick table, and for making the images, he would be lying underneath a table, on top of the table, instead of a piece of wood, would be a piece of glass with some tissue paper, and on it there would be objects. Now, how do you achieve movement? The lights were on top, and Franciszka would be moving the lights, and Stefan was under the table with a crank camera, you know, doing it image by image. So
it was lost, though, or thought lost.
Well, when they were in France, they deposited their films at the beginning of the war with Witwer Film Laboratory. And that same year, Nazis stole all the films from this laboratory. And the Themersons thought they would never see their films again. How many films were there? 5. The Themersons made 7 films in all, 2 of them in England. But the 5 which they deposited were all lost. Europa was, in a way, their most important film. It was a film against fascism. It was a film about Europe being destroyed, Europe consuming itself. And it was a silent film. But I had read in one of the reviews of the film, the reviews of the film in Poland in 1933 were very positive, but I had read in one of them that Stefan intended the film to have music. And I approached a composer in Holland to compose music for it.
And there's also been interest expressed in the whole Gaberbocchus Press kind of archive, hasn't there? Exhibitions proposed?
Yes, yes, there are exhibitions, and if you go online, put in Gaberbocchus, you'll find a lot of information.
So their legacy lives on?
Oh, it does. Franciszka had a one-man show at Cromwell Place a few months ago, and in March she has 4 paintings at the Barbican in an exhibition about British art after the war. Now, things are very much moving because it goes by generation. New generation doesn't have the same view as an old generation. And now we have so many foreign names that a foreign name is no longer strange.
It's not a handicap.
It's not a handicap.
What do you feel that these beautiful books say to us in this time? They speak of a very particular era, but what do they communicate about this one?
Well, what is interesting about these 3 volumes of the catalogue is that they are beautiful in themselves. Then when people start looking through them, they find that the material that's described and illustrated is enormously interesting. It's well presented. One can actually see through these what the originals might have been.